My ex from 10 years ago called and said, "I need you to testify that I'm a good mother." I was staring at a schematic for a new pedestrian bridge, reviewing the load-bearing calculations, when the call came in. The sound of the unfamiliar number, combined with that sentence, felt like a literal structural failure in my meticulously ordered afternoon. I am 34 years old. As a structural engineer, I believe in control, order, and predictable outcomes. My past with Rachel, which ended a decade ago, was the singular instance of chaos in my adult life, and I had successfully filed it away under lessons learned avoid. "Get someone else, Rachel," I said, my voice steady, though my grip on my pen tightened until my knuckles went white. I did not need to ask why she was calling. Rachel only ever called when she needed something impossible, usually something that required me to compromise my own integrity. "You haven't been a good anything in 10 years. I moved the phone away from my ear, intending to end the conversation. A clean break, like snapping a brittle beam. But she spoke quickly, her voice cracking, sounding dangerously close to the genuine distress she had always been so good at faking. "It's not what you think. They're trying to take my daughter, please." For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I felt a pang of something akin to pity. It was a cold, sharp feeling, like the momentary chill when the air conditioning kicks on too hard. A child. That changed the calculation. Then, my cynicism, built over years of dealing with her emotional manipulation, kicked in. I remembered the last fight, the lies, the wreckage she'd left behind when we finally split. That memory was the structural reinforcement I needed. "Rachel, I'm sorry about your custody case, but no," I stated, injecting a deliberate coldness into the words. "I'm not lying in court for you. Find a real character witness." She didn't argue. She just hung up, the silence on my end heavy and absolute. I returned to my schematics, but the numbers blurred. It was done. I had set a boundary, and my life could proceed as planned, undisturbed. The feeling of security lasted precisely 1 hour. There was a heavy, insistent knock on the door of my apartment. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, but a demand. I opened it to find Rachel tear-stained and frantic, and standing beside her was my sister, Maya Evans. Maya, a kindergarten teacher, was usually soft-spoken and nurturing, but her eyes held a hard, critical glint that was startling. "We need to talk," Maya announced, pushing past me into the entrance hall. She was 30 years old, 4 years my junior, and hadn't crossed a boundary like this in years. Rachel followed, dissolving into theatrical sobs. "Maya, what are you doing here?" I asked, closing the door and feeling the controlled atmosphere of my home immediately dissolve into a toxic mess. "Helping someone who actually needs help," Maya shot back, her tone laced with judgment. They spent the next hour tag-teaming me on the couch. Rachel was a wreck, crying about losing her daughter, Ariana. Maya was the relentless prosecutor, calling me a heartless monster, selfish and cowardly. Every time I tried to turn the conversation back to the logistics, to the facts, or most importantly, to Maya's inexplicable involvement, she would change the subject, weaponizing my orderly nature against me. "Why are you so invested in this, Maya? You barely know Rachel," I insisted. "That's not the point, Elijah. The point is a 7-year-old girl is going to foster care because you can't look past a 10-year-old breakup." I continued to refuse. Lying in court was perjury, a breach of my professional and personal code. I would not allow Rachel's chaos to compromise my integrity or my future with Jamia. Finally, Rachel stopped crying and looked at me, the mask of despair briefly lifting to reveal a steely, almost predatory core. Her green eyes were fixed on mine. Rachel looked at me, her green eyes fixed and cold. "You're going to testify whether you like it or not," she whispered, her voice low and menacing. I felt a cold dread settle in my gut. I had just witnessed the moment the game changed. This was no longer a plea for help, it was a promise of war. My orderly life was officially under siege. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she meant every single word. The cold dread Rachel left me with felt physical, like a hairline fracture in the foundation of my apartment. I had agreed to end the conversation, but her parting shot, "You're going to testify whether you like it or not," was a declaration of war. That war didn't stop at my doorstep. It became a public spectacle that eroded the careful structure of my life. Over the next week, the coercion campaign began with the calculated ruthlessness I recognized from our past. It was never a direct argument. It was a performance. I would be at my gym, 20 minutes into my morning routine, when Rachel and Maya would appear. They never approached me directly. Instead, they would stand near the water fountain and engage in a loud, sorrowful conversation designed for maximum public consumption. "It's just so sad," Rachel would sniffle, loud enough for the personal trainers and morning regulars to hear. To know a child could be saved by one phone call, by one person being kind, but they just refuse. "I know, Rachel," Maya would respond, her voice dripping with misplaced pity. "I can't believe my own brother would be happy to let a 7-year-old girl go into foster care. How can someone be so heartless?" The narrative was simple. Elijah, the wealthy, cold engineer, was allowing an innocent child to be traumatized out of spite. The regulars, who only knew me as the quiet guy on the elliptical, started to look at me with a mix of pity and disgust. I couldn't argue. I couldn't explain 10 years of manipulation in the middle of a weight room without looking unhinged. I simply stopped going to the gym. The harassment escalated, becoming less subtle and more destructive. Rachel started a calculated social media campaign. She didn't use her own name. She used a burner account and focused entirely on me. She used my full name, Elijah Scott, my photo, and worst of all, tagged my workplace. The posts were short, vicious, and viral. "This man works at Atlas Structural Engineering. He could save a child from foster care, but refuses." The comments were a cesspool of outrage. People I did not know were calling my office, demanding to speak to the child hater. My orderly professional life, which I had spent years building as a sanctuary against chaos, was suddenly under siege. My boss, Mr. Sterling, called me into his office on Thursday morning. The atmosphere was stiff, the polished mahogany table between us feeling miles wide. "Elijah, I know you're handling a personal matter," he said, his tone measured but firm. "The volume of calls has become disruptive. I need you to resolve this. We can't have our reputation tied to a viral campaign, however untrue its claims." I felt the structural integrity of my composure start to fail. I explained the situation, focusing on Rachel's history of manipulation and the falsehood of the claims. I could see the skepticism in his eyes. How could such a rational man be involved in such high-drama mess? I was forced to concede. "I will resolve it, sir. I'll make sure the video is taken down and the calls stop." The entire ordeal was confusing. Every time I had cornered Maya, demanding to know the real reason she was siding with Rachel, a woman she barely knew, Maya would deflect. "It's just the right thing to do, Elijah. Why are you being so selfish?" She'd snap, changing the subject back to my perceived lack of humanity. Her involvement was the most painful part of the assault. Maya was my sister. We had always been close, and her betrayal felt like a deep, unexpected wound. She was acting as Rachel's most effective weapon, leveraging our shared history against me. I couldn't understand why she was so invested in Rachel's cause. I was exhausted and mentally frayed. I realized the only way to stop the bleeding was to concede a small point. I couldn't continue fighting Rachel on two fronts, in my private life and in my professional life. That evening, I sent Rachel a curt text message. "I'll come to court. I'll tell the truth about what I know." Her response was immediate and strangely elated. Her whole face, captured in a quick, grainy video selfie she sent back, changed from desperate misery to triumphant relief. She immediately texted someone else. Minutes later, a knock came, and there stood Maya, looking slightly sheepish but determined, clutching a stack of papers. She walked in and tossed them onto my coffee table. "Sign this affidavit about Rachel's parenting," Maya commanded, her previous desperation replaced by brisk efficiency. "We'll submit it to the court before the hearing." I picked up the papers. They were full of lies, statements about Rachel being an amazing mother, claims that I had personally witnessed her devotion for years. The sheer, audacious falsehood of it was breathtaking. I had agreed to the truth, not a fabrication. "I can't sign this, Maya. This is perjury. I haven't seen Rachel in 10 years, and even when I did, she was incapable of devotion." Maya's eyes pleaded with me, stripping away the anger and leaving behind genuine fear. "Then at least come to court, Elijah, just be there. Your presence alone might help her case, even if you just say you know her. Please just agree to show up." I stared at my sister. The betrayal was complete, but the desperation was real. I saw the deep fear that Rachel had managed to instill in her. Exhausted and just wanting the nightmare to end, I agreed to that minimal concession. I would attend the hearing, nothing more. I just wanted the public shaming and the constant pressure to stop. I had set a dangerous precedent, giving Rachel a millimeter of ground. But I believed the rest of my life could be saved if I could just survive the court date. I thought agreeing to attend the court hearing would buy me peace, a small price to pay to stop the viral shaming and the harassment. But I had fundamentally underestimated Rachel's capacity for public cruelty, which peaked precisely the night I was meant to celebrate my future. Jamia and I had spent 6 months planning our engagement party. It was meant to be small, sophisticated, and a testament to the stable, ordered life we were building together. The exact opposite of my past, the venue was a warmly lit gallery space downtown. Jamia was radiant in a sapphire dress, and I felt a sense of profound protective happiness. Just as Jamia's father, a respected architect, raised his glass to give a toast, the heavy front door swung open. Every head turned. It was Rachel, and with her was a quiet, solemn little girl with huge green eyes and dark hair, who was undeniably her daughter, Ariana. Ariana was about 7 years old, dressed in a party dress that looked a little too small, and she clutched a worn doll. The resemblance to Rachel was striking, but there was an innocence about the child that made my stomach turn. Rachel walked Ariana directly up to our table, past the silent guests, past the father still holding his forgotten glass. Jamia's face went pale, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. Rachel bent down to Ariana, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear over the sudden, painful silence. "Ariana, this is Elijah. This is the woman who can save us." The moment was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to put the entire moral weight of her case onto the shoulders of an innocent child. Ariana looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Are you going to help my mommy?" she asked, her voice a small, reedy sound that cut through the silence like glass. Jamia's father slowly lowered his glass. Everyone was staring, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Jamia gripped my hand so tightly I felt the bones grind. "Rachel, this isn't fair," Jamia said, her voice strained, an edge of protective anger hardening her tone. "What's not fair is letting them take my baby." Rachel snapped back. Crucially, her free hand was holding her phone, filming the entire interaction, the red recording light an evil little eye watching us all. I was trapped. If I tried to move Rachel, I would look aggressive. If I spoke, I would be arguing with a desperate mother in front of a child. All I could do was stand frozen as Rachel pulled Ariana away, filming the two of them walking past the bewildered crowd, casting us as the villains in her tragic movie. The video went viral within the next 2 hours. Woman refuses to save child from foster care at her own engagement party. The caption was designed to elicit maximum fury. My phone became a relentless noise machine of hate mail and negative comments. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Maya arrived at my door again. She didn't look triumphant. She looked exhausted and scared. She carried a thick folder of documents. "I talked to a lawyer," she said, her voice flat. "You can be subpoenaed as a character witness. The court can compel your testimony." She showed me the papers. They looked official, court letterhead, case numbers, a stern warning about contempt. I later learned these documents were almost entirely fabricated or stolen, pieced together to look legitimate. But at the time, the sheer weight of the formal language felt real. "Just agree to testify truthfully." "Elijah," Maya begged, the fear returning to her voice. "Or they could hold you in contempt. It's too late to fight the court now. Just go and tell them you know Rachel, and that she's trying her best." The public humiliation, the destruction of my engagement celebration, and now this official, looking legal threat broke the last sliver of my principled resistance. I wasn't just fighting a person anymore. I was fighting an engineered crisis that felt insurmountable. My cynicism told me that Rachel would stop at nothing, and Maya was too deep in her manipulation to see the truth. Over the next few days, Rachel escalated one final time, bringing in her entire extended family. Her mother, her father, even a brother from another state. They cornered me in my living room, cycling through guilt, anger, and spiritual shaming for hours. The collective force of their emotional labor was overwhelming. I realized I couldn't beat the chaos. The only way to survive was to give the predator the smallest viable piece of prey. I had to choose the lesser harm. I would attend. I would testify truthfully about what little I knew of Rachel. I would not lie under oath, but I would play her game to save my own life. I was emotionally drained, my principled stand replaced by the hollow fatigue of a man who just wanted the siege to end. I had given in not out of compassion, but out of sheer bone-deep exhaustion. I hoped the sight of me in the courtroom would be enough. I just needed to close the door on the wreckage Rachel had created and start cleaning up the pieces of my life. I hoped this was the final concession. The pressure was intense, but I was wrong. The siege was just beginning. The court date arrived, and the solemnity of the room only intensified my anger at being coerced into this mess. I walked into the courthouse, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and nervous anxiety, and immediately spotted Rachel sitting at the petitioner's table, looking small and pale. Maya sat in the gallery just behind her, her face anxious. They exchanged a brief, relieved glance when they saw me enter, confirming that my forced presence was the only thing they cared about. I sat in the back of the gallery, next to a reporter I recognized from the television news, and watched the proceedings unfold. The judge, a man named Maddox with an imposing black robe, called the case. The first witness was Holden, Rachel's ex-husband, Ariana's father of record, and the opposing party. He was calm, articulate, and presented a devastating case against Rachel. He testified about her repeated neglect, her history of instability, her heavy drinking, and documented incidents of her leaving Ariana alone for hours at a time. Every detail he presented felt like a brick striking Rachel's crumbling foundation. I realized with sickening clarity that the stakes were desperately real, and Rachel's behavior wasn't just manipulative. It was endangering her child. My own ethical code warred with my exhaustion. I felt a fleeting sense of professional respect for Holden's presentation, even as I resented being drawn into the conflict. I had only agreed to be present, nothing more. Then, Rachel's lawyer, Gregory Penn, stood up and called his next witness. The petitioner calls Elijah Scott. I froze. I hadn't agreed to this. My agreement with Maya had been explicit attendance only. Now, I was being forced to the stand under the pretense of cooperation. Rachel looked back at me with a desperate, silent plea. I stood, walked slowly to the witness stand, and took the oath. The whole situation felt like a moral trap closing around me. On the stand, Gregory Penn tried to make me into a character witness for a woman I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Mr. Scott, how long have you known the petitioner Rachel Hayes? 10 years, Your Honor, I replied, my voice dry. But we haven't been close. And in that time, have you ever seen her harm her daughter, Ariana? This was the trick. They wanted a simple binary answer. I've barely seen her with her daughter, Your Honor. Just once recently, at an event. Mr. Scott, Gregory interrupted, leaning forward. Please, just answer yes or no. Have you ever seen her harm her daughter? No, I conceded. It was the truth, but it was useless contextually. No further questions. Your Honor. Gregory Penn looked pleased, having secured the bare minimum he needed to counter the neglect claims. I felt a surge of cold fury. I had been used again, forced to validate Rachel's fragile case. But then Natalia Wilcox, Holden's sharp lawyer, stood up for cross-examination. She was smiling, but her eyes were calculating. Mr. Scott, you said you've barely seen Rachel with her daughter Ariana. Why is that? I looked across the courtroom. Rachel and Maya were both shaking their heads rapidly, their faces pale with panic. They knew exactly where this line of questioning led. My composure, my professionalism, my structural integrity. It all collapsed under the weight of the past week's harassment and betrayal. I decided, in that split second, that I was done playing Rachel's game. The truth about her character was long overdue. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, my ex from 10 years ago called and said, I need you to testify that I'm a good mother. But the person on the stand today is proof she hasn't been honest about anything. The courtroom went quiet. Judge Maddox's eyebrows arched. Natalia Wilcox pounced on the silence. Can you elaborate, Mr. Scott? Why have you avoided the mother of a child in this court? I looked directly at Rachel. Because she's manipulative and dishonest. I have avoided her for years because she is incapable of maintaining a healthy or honest relationship with anyone. I recounted everything, the cold, hard facts of the ambush. I detailed the harassment campaign, the viral video, the fake legal documents Maya presented, and how they had forced me onto the stand through blackmail and coercion. Rachel's lawyer objected repeatedly, his voice frantic, but the damage was done. My cathartic burst of honesty had destroyed the false credibility they had momentarily built. I was dismissed, leaving behind a courtroom thick with stunned silence. I had finally prioritized my own truth, but I had no idea of the catastrophic emotional and legal storm I had just unleashed. The silence that followed my testimony was broken by the judge calling a brief recess, a necessity after the courtroom erupted into murmurs. I headed toward the men's room, needing a moment of sharp, solitary silence to process the magnitude of my angry outburst. But before I reached the door, Maya cornered me. "How could you?" she hissed, grabbing my arm, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and rage I had never seen directed at me. "How could you say those things? You just ruined everything. You and Rachel ruined everything the moment you dragged me into your mess and ambushed my engagement party," I retorted, pulling my arm away. The fury I felt was potent, overriding my desire for composure. "Now tell me the truth, Maya. Why do you care so much about Rachel's custody? Why would you sacrifice our relationship for her?" Maya went quiet, her intense anger collapsing into sudden, raw grief. She looked down at the polished marble floor, her shoulders slumping. "How long have you been together?" I asked, the question arriving with cold, analytical certainty. The relentless protection, the constant fear. It only made sense if their relationship was deeper than a casual friendship. Her response was barely a whisper. 4 years. I stared at my sister, feeling the dizzying reality of her betrayal. 4 years of dinners, of holidays, of my engagement, all built on a foundation of lies she had constructed with Rachel. The shock was immediately followed by a terrifying hypothesis. As Ariana, I couldn't finish the thought. Maya shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We used a donor, Elijah. But I'm on the birth certificate too. I'm her co-parent." Her voice cracked completely. "If Rachel loses custody, I lose Ariana." Before I could fully process the gravity of my sister's deception, the bathroom door opened. Rachel walked in, her face pale, the desperation now replaced by a chilling, total surrender. She looked directly at me. "It's not from a donor, Elijah," she said quietly. "Ariana isn't a donor baby." The air in the small, tile-lined room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I waited, dreading the next sentence, but already knowing its shape. "Your ex-boyfriend, Tom. Remember when you brought him to the Christmas party 9 years ago, 2 months after you broke up? Wait, something happened. Ariana is his." The world stopped spinning. I looked from my partner, indeceit sister, who had known for 4 years, to the woman who had hidden a massive, life-altering truth for 7 years. I struggled to string the syllables together. "You had a baby with my ex-boyfriend. You never told me." "Never told him, either of you. He doesn't know either." Rachel added, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. "But if the court finds out Ariana's biological father was never notified, I'll definitely lose custody. They'll put her in foster care while they track him down. Please, Elijah, I can't let that happen." The bailiff knocked on the door, announcing that the court was resuming. I walked back toward the courtroom, carrying information that could destroy everything. I sat down at the witness stand, the truth of Tom, of Maya, and of Rachel's total deception burning in my mind. Judge Maddox looked at me, his face impassive. "Mr. Scott, do you have anything to add to your testimony?" All the consequences of my choice descended upon me like a physical weight. I saw Rachel gripping the table, bone-white with terror. I saw Maya in the gallery, her eyes begging me not to speak. If I told the truth, the court would order an investigation. Tom would find out he had a daughter he had missed 7 years of knowing. Rachel would face the legal consequences of fraud. Maya would lose the child she had helped raise for 4 years, becoming a legal stranger overnight. And the center of all that chaos, Ariana, would likely be placed with strangers while 3 adults fought over her paternity and custody. My mouth felt dry. My hands were shaking. I had come here determined to protect my integrity by telling the truth about Rachel's manipulation. Now, the absolute, painful truth would hurt an innocent child the most. My emotional arc, defined by avoidance and control, suddenly demanded a terrifying, self-sacrificing vulnerability. I opened my mouth and cleared my throat. I requested to speak to both lawyers privately before continuing. Maddox, visibly annoyed, granted the recess. The bailiff led me, Gregory Penn, and Natalia Wilcox into a tiny conference room. The door closed, sealing us in with the terrifying secret. Gregory, Rachel's lawyer, looked worried, already suspecting the worst. Natalia, Holden's attorney, looked intensely curious, smelling blood in the water. I told them everything, the words spilling out fast. Tom, the man I dated years ago. The secret pregnancy, Ariana being his biological daughter, Maya's 4-year co-parenting role, and the shared deception. I explained how Rachel had confessed it all seconds ago, out of paralyzing fear. Natalia's eyes lit up. This was the winning ticket for her client. This information proves a pattern of deception and parental unfitness, she exclaimed. Gregory Penn put his head in his hands, defeated. He confirmed that if Tom was never notified, the entire existing custody arrangement would be thrown out. The court could put Ariana in temporary foster care while they tracked down Tom, establish paternity, and figure out custody. He explained, his voice low and concerned. It could take months. She could end up with strangers. I sat there feeling physically ill. I had the power to expose the manipulator and uphold the absolute truth, but that truth would inevitably harm the child I was trying to protect. My decision was no longer about punishing Rachel. It was about minimizing the damage to Ariana. It was the hardest, most ethically complicated choice of my life, demanding that I sacrifice my immediate integrity to protect a child's long-term emotional well-being. When we returned to the courtroom 15 minutes later, every eye was on me. I walked back up to the stand and asked Judge Maddox if I could make a statement instead of answering more questions. He agreed. I looked at Rachel, her face frozen in terror, and Maya begging me silently. I spoke, choosing my words carefully. I said I had been angry when I talked about Rachel's character, and perhaps that anger made me say things that were not totally fair. I stated that I was not comfortable judging whether Rachel was a good mom or not, because I hadn't actually been around her and Ariana in recent years. I omitted the entire, devastating truth about Tom. It was technically true that I hadn't been around them. It was a half-lie, the most excruciating, vulnerable choice I had ever made. I had sacrificed my own clarity for the child's chance at stability. Relief washed over Rachel's face. I had saved her case, but I knew I had not saved her life. I had simply postponed the truth. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a heavy sense of complicity, which Maya's relief only intensified. We had to face the deeper, hidden costs of Rachel's lies. Maya was waiting for me in the lobby. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into a quiet alcove. Her eyes were red and puffy. "What did you tell them in that room?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I didn't say anything about Tom being Ariana's dad," I replied, watching as the tension drained out of her body. She actually hugged me, a desperate, clumsy embrace that felt strange after years of emotional distance. I pulled back. "You and Rachel owe me real explanations. For the 4 years of lies, for the harassment, for bringing your problems to my engagement party." Maya nodded quickly, desperate to placate me. "We will. I promise. But right now I need to get Ariana home. She's upset from being in court all day." I walked out to the parking lot and found Jamia waiting. She took one look at my face and knew instantly that something had fractured beyond the stress of the courtroom. On the drive home, I explained everything, the entire astonishing, sickening truth: Maya and Rachel's relationship, the shared co-parenting, and the ultimate, devastating paternity secret that Ariana was Tom's biological daughter, a fact hidden from him for 7 years. Jamia listened without interrupting, squeezing my hand when I finished. She confirmed what I already knew: I had made the only choice that placed Ariana's immediate safety first, even if it meant giving Rachel a temporary reprieve. But then she asked the question that I had been avoiding. "Are you going to tell Tom?" I hadn't thought past the courtroom. Telling Tom would start the chaos I had just worked so hard to postpone. But keeping the secret felt like assisting Rachel in her perpetual deception. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark living room while Jamia slept soundly. I typed in search terms: biological father, custody rights, unknown paternity, legal cases. The results were chilling. Case after case showed families torn apart, children shuttled between homes, years of legal fighting, and the inevitable emotional trauma of finding out the truth was deliberately hidden by those they loved. The pattern was clear. Telling Tom meant destroying Ariana's carefully managed stability. Not telling him meant living with the fact that I was actively participating in a massive lie that denied a father his child. The structural engineer in me craved a clean solution, but there was only messy, painful collateral damage in either direction. The next morning, Maya appeared at 7:15. She looked just as exhausted as I felt, holding 2 large coffee cups. We sat on my couch in silence, the coffee untouched. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm so sorry, Elijah." The apology felt real this time, stripped of Rachel's manipulative influence. Her voice cracked as she explained her fear. She said she was scared to tell me about Rachel, because she knew I would hate it, and probably hate her too. The relationship started during a vulnerable moment, and Rachel, always charming at the start, convinced Maya to keep it secret. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into 4 years, until the lie was too huge to admit. Maya was crying genuine tears, unlike the manipulative display I had witnessed Rachel perfect. She said she missed me, missed our family, and missed being honest. The worst part, she confessed, was watching me plan the engagement party, knowing Rachel was determined to ruin it, but feeling utterly trapped because she believed Ariana's future depended on her compliance. Then came the terrible part about Tom. Rachel had blurted out the truth 2 years into their relationship, during a fight. She immediately terrified Maya with the possibility of the court finding out, swearing that the truth would guarantee Ariana ended up in foster care during the paternity investigation. Maya, already deeply attached to Ariana, who called her Aunt Maya, had kept the terrible secret out of love and fear. I tried to convince Rachel to tell Tom. Maya whispered, her voice thick with regret, but she always had an excuse. The truth is, Rachel wanted total control. She controlled me, and she controlled the narrative of Ariana's life. I started to understand that Maya was not just a willing accomplice. She was another person Rachel had successfully trapped. Maya had made bad choices, yes, but Rachel had engineered the cell she was living in. The custody battle had only intensified Rachel's desperate, controlling behavior, making Maya feel even more impossible to leave. I told Maya I needed time to process the sheer weight of the 4 years of deception, but I made it clear that I didn't want to lose my sister forever over Rachel's lies. Maya looked immensely relieved. We agreed to try therapy together, to begin the long, agonizing process of rebuilding trust. The conversation had shifted the burden. The core conflict was no longer about Rachel and me, but about the structure of truth, and what I was willing to sacrifice to uphold it. I had saved Ariana from the short-term chaos of foster care, but I was now complicit in a lie that felt morally suffocating. I knew the stability I had bought was temporary. The truth about Tom was a ticking clock. I had protected Ariana from the immediate harm of foster care by suppressing the truth, but I couldn't escape the weight of the core secret, a burden that was actively poisoning my life and my relationship with Jamia. The temporary calm I had purchased was a lie, and every passing day made me feel more complicit in Rachel's deception. A few days after the court hearing, I saw Ariana at a park near my apartment. Maya was there, supervising her on the swings. Ariana, 7 years old and absorbed in her own world, looked up at me and waved, her face lighting up. I watched her play, and the similarities to Tom, my ex-boyfriend, were undeniable and shocking. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the quick, sudden smile that brightened her whole face, the restless energy in her movements. It all echoed the man I had dated 9 years ago. It was a cruel biological detail that only deepened my moral conflict. I realized I wasn't just hiding a secret to save Rachel's stability. I was actively denying a man the knowledge of his own daughter, and denying Ariana a chance to know her biological father. That evening, I had a difficult and necessary argument with Jamia. I was distracted, irritable, and consumed by the paternity secret. She finally cornered me while we were making dinner. "You're protecting Rachel," Jamia stated simply, putting down her knife. "You're compromising your own values to help her keep a terrible lie." I argued back fiercely. "I am not protecting Rachel! I am protecting Ariana from being put into foster care while the courts sort out who her biological father is." Telling the truth right now means destroying her world. And keeping the secret means destroying her world later. Jamia countered, her voice firm. Ariana has a fundamental right to know where she comes from. Tom has a fundamental right to know he has a daughter. You can't just decide to keep a man from knowing about his own child, Elijah, no matter how chaotic the consequences. Her words hit me with the force of structural collapse. Jamia was right. I was using the fear of chaos as an excuse to maintain my own comfort and avoid the agonizing responsibility of telling the truth. The following day, I consulted a family law attorney, giving her the hypothetical details of the case without names. She confirmed that while I had no legal duty to reveal the paternity information I learned privately, if Tom ever found out later, he could potentially sue for custody, arguing his parental rights were violated. She also reiterated that revealing it now, while the custody case was already unstable, would lead to the exact scenario I feared. The entire case would be thrown into chaos, and Ariana could temporarily end up with state services. I left the attorney's office feeling no less confused, but with a new certainty. There was no way to protect Ariana from the truth forever. The crisis was inevitable, and postponing it would only make it worse, adding the weight of years of deception to the child's eventual trauma. In therapy with Maya that week, I brought up the Tom situation again. Maya surprisingly admitted she thought Tom should know. She understood why I was hesitant, but she felt the guilt of the lie compounding every day. Our therapist gave me the final, necessary shift in perspective. She said, "You aren't responsible for fixing Rachel's lies, Elijah. You are only responsible for making choices you can live with." What could I live with? I could not live with denying a father and a daughter their connection just to protect Rachel. I had to choose the long-term truth over short-term stability. I spent the next week preparing for the inevitable chaos, knowing the decision would explode my life and Maya's. I opened Facebook and found Tom's profile. He was in another state, married with 2 small children. His life looked stable and happy. I felt a surge of guilt knowing I was about to detonate his world, but the image of Ariana, my sister's daughter, smiling with a face that wasn't Rachel's, hardened my resolve. I sent him a simple, vague message. I told him I needed to discuss something important from our past and asked if he was willing to talk privately. He responded 3 hours later, agreeing to a video call the following weekend, but asking what on earth this was about. On Saturday afternoon, I sat in my living room with my laptop on the coffee table. Jamia sat next to me, offering silent support, her hand covering mine. The video call started. Tom's face, older but familiar, appeared on the screen. He asked what this was about, and I took a deep, steadying breath. I told him as gently as I could that something happened after we broke up, something he didn't know about. I explained about Rachel and the Christmas party, and how Ariana was born 8 months later. I watched the shock, the denial, and the terrifying realization wash over his features. He asked if I was telling him he had a daughter. I said yes. He went completely silent for a long moment, processing the 7 missing years of his child's life. He asked why Rachel never told him. I explained about the custody battle and the web of lies she had constructed to maintain control. I gave him the contact information for the court-appointed guardian, Anastasia, and told him he had the right to intervene legally. Tom thanked me, his voice rough with emotion, and hung up. I sat there, feeling like I had just set off a bomb. The emotional arc of avoidance was over. I had chosen the truth, and the resultant chaos was already in motion. I knew the fallout would be brutal, but I also knew it was the only ethical path forward for Ariana. The explosion was instantaneous and exactly as terrible as I'd feared, but what eventually emerged from the rubble was a functional, albeit unconventional, form of family. Tom moved fast. Within a week, he had hired a lawyer and filed for paternity testing and custody rights. The court, furious about the undisclosed information, immediately reopened Ariana's case. Rachel called me screaming that I had destroyed her life and Ariana's. Maya sent frantic text messages, crying that she was going to lose the child she considered her own. Rachel showed up at my apartment one final time, yelling that I had ruined everything and that Ariana would end up in foster care because of my selfishness. I told her this was the consequence of her 7 years of lies, not my one moment of truth. She left defeated and tearful, and I felt sick but resolute. 2 weeks later, we were all back in court, including Tom and his lawyer. Judge Maddox, visibly annoyed, ordered DNA testing to confirm paternity. 10 tense days later, the results came back. Tom was Ariana's biological father with a match rate over 99%. The court scheduled mandatory mediation. Instead of the simple two-parent negotiation, the mediation now involved Rachel, Holden, and Tom, each with their own legal counsel, plus a child therapist to focus solely on Ariana's welfare. After hours of difficult, grueling negotiation, the impossible happened. They worked out a structured, three-parent schedule. Ariana would spend Monday and Tuesday with Rachel, Wednesday and Thursday with Holden, and the weekend alternating between Tom's house and back to Rachel's. The structure was complicated, requiring constant communication and color-coded calendars, but it was functional. 3 weeks after Tom officially entered the custody arrangement, Maya called me to meet for coffee. She looked different, lighter somehow. She told me she had ended things with Rachel permanently. It wasn't about the custody outcome anymore, Elijah, she explained, holding my gaze. I realized I was in love with being Ariana's parent more than I was in love with being Rachel's partner. The relationship was toxic, and now that I have a defined, non-negotiable role in Ariana's life as a family friend who she visits, I am free. She had finally broken free from Rachel's manipulative orbit, prioritizing her own mental health and honesty. The cost was high, but the freedom was undeniable. Jamie and I rescheduled our engagement party, keeping it small and intimate this time. Maya attended and, in a quiet corner, apologized sincerely to Jamie for the chaos and the public humiliation she had helped inflict. Jamie, gracious and ethical as always, accepted her apology. I watched my sister and my fiancé building a new, genuine relationship based on truth, not secrets. Meanwhile, the reports on Ariana were overwhelmingly positive. The court-appointed guardian confirmed she was thriving. The structure and consistency, which she hadn't had before, gave her a profound sense of security. She was excited about having 3 different bedrooms and multiple sets of siblings. I thought a lot about the decision to tell Tom. It had caused immediate, painful chaos, but watching Ariana thrive now, with 3 families invested in her welfare, I knew it had been the only right choice. She deserved the truth. Tom deserved his daughter. The immediate pain of the truth was always better than the eventual, compounded trauma of the lie. Rachel's deception had caused enough damage. Adding my silence on top would have made me an architect of the trauma. 2 months later, I got a package. Inside was a drawing from Ariana. It was a simple picture of stick figures labeled with everyone's names. Rachel and Maya Holden, Tom and his wife and kids, and at the very end, a stick figure labeled my friend, with my name underneath. Hearts were drawn around all of us. I put the drawing on my fridge. It was a chaotic, unconventional family portrait, born from manipulation and saved by a painful choice of truth. Ariana had 3 homes, multiple siblings, and more adults who cared about her than most kids ever get. It was messy, but it was real, and it was working. My journey, which started in avoidance and cynicism, ended in the acceptance that a chaotic, loving truth was infinitely stronger and more structurally sound than a perfect, controlled lie. My world was no longer orderly, but it was finally honest, and in that hard-won honesty, I found peace.